prosperity bringing potential of industry and manufacturing. SDGs, United Nations SDGs, especially gave a very important place to the industry, the SDG 9, for instance. But what is new is the strategic dimension. The manufacturing power is now being treated like a military power. I mean, and it is being weaponized like military power. So that is very new context, because until recently, in the heydays of hyper globalization, it was kind of, we thought it doesn't matter whether you produce or not produce anything, you have access to everything from everywhere. So this is very important. And in that context, prosperity and economic power and all that, the revival of industrial policy in India since 2014, at least in last 10, 11 years, with the Make in India and all other reforms which have been taken, and the PLI scheme which was referred to earlier by Mr. Shankar, and the sectoral missions, including the $10 billion semiconductor mission, have to be put in that perspective. And, so we seriously trying to build the, manufacturing capability. So now, Suman in this morning referred to this fact that manufacturing value added share in total GDP has stagnated. Why it is? The simple answer is that when you have in an economy a sector more dynamic than manufacturing, you will have that consequence. So we have fortunately a services sector which is very dynamic, which is always growing faster than manufacturing, that is bringing the share of, or that is not allowing the share of manufacturing value added in GDP to rise. But in my view, the right metric to see whether we are doing well on manufacturing or not is to see India's share, the share of India's manufacturing in global manufacturing. So MVA of India in global manufacturing. And if you see that, this graph on the right top right, shows that we have consistently been improving our share in global manufacturing value added. And from 0.5%, we have reached 3.1%. So it's not bad, but it is less impressive compared to what others have achieved. China, for instance. And so China's share globally is 28.7%, nearly 30%, and growing still far. The other thing we have achieved in manufacturing is that our manufacturing value added is far more diversified than it was in the early years of our independence. So you see the last bar, or column, and very so many sectors, or none of them dominating the scene, like textiles, the yellow bar part of this column, which was very large in the beginning of this 70s. But when we try to, achieve this manufacturing development, and this is another point which was discussed this morning, we are facing headwinds, the change external context for manufacturing, and there are several mega trends. Couple of them are very central to this. One is this rise of protectionism and globalization, globalization turning into globalization, that is. So in the figure on the top right, you see that average annual growth of FDI and global trade used to be in the average of 20% per year. It has come down to 2 to 4%, if at all, in the recent years. So globalization has become globalization. And then there is this restructuring of global supply chains and reshoring, rise of industrial policy in the West. The new Washington consensus, if you Google, is not about liberalization, globalization, and privatization, which Washington consensus used to refer to, is now about industrial policy. So we talk about Trumpian policies of late, but it is not, Trump was not the one who started. Biden administration brought in 2022 three important pieces of legislation: CHIPS Act, Inflation Reduction Act, and the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which put on the table $1.2 trillion to be given to industry in incentives and subsidies. They also, Biden administration also imposed 100% tariffs on China's imports. And so Trump is taking that trend, very aggressively forward, and with very high reciprocal tariffs. But I think the correct term to use is one-sided tariffs. These are not reciprocal, these are one-sided. He is demanding that you give 0% to me, and I will still impose from 15% to 20 to 30, and India 50%. EU is following the same path, virtually the same industrial policy, and on top of that, they have CBAM, this Common Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is actually a protectionist tool to keep certain imports out. The strategic interventions of the type domestic content requirements, etc., which were part of industrial policy, which were phased out under TRIMS agreement, have been brought back. And so a lot of deployment of them in the Western world. And then the additional handicaps or restrictions we have to face when we try to industrialize as a late industrializer, these net zero commitments, the AI revolution, which is changing the future of work and all that. The other mega trend I want to talk about is very high concentration or domination of global supply chains by one country in the world. So we have shares of the global production capacity in different sectors. And the first column is the traditional conventional industries. Second column, new green and sunrise industries and critical minerals. So in the second column, you see all these red ones. Upwards of 80% of practically every sector. Solar PVs, lithium ion batteries, electric vehicles, smartphones, and laptops, critical minerals 85% and all that. And this domination is being weaponized, is being used to stop others in their tracks. So the challenges arising from highly concentrated supply chains, we all know about the COVID times when lockdowns disrupted supply chains. But the anti-competitive practices, the dominant supplier may try to eliminate competition through dumping, which was the textbook case, but now you see it happening. And so many suppliers of critical products have been outcompeted in different countries. And I have been reading some news coming from Southeast Asia, Thailand, a country where I used to live for many years, and Indonesia, where thousands of factories, MSMEs, have been closed down because of the influx of cheap imports from China. And in Indonesia, the displaced workers were involved in agitations against the government, for instance, recently. So weaponization of monopoly position, we are facing it ourselves. The ban on exports of rare earth magnets and critical minerals has affected some of our industries. The technicians working in the assembly plants of Foxconn, for instance, were called back some months ago. just 2 weeks ago, China has taken India to WTO for PLI subsidies, PLI incentives for solar PV manufacturing. Even though it's a documented evidence, economists ran a special issue. I mean, a few weeks ago, I was in a meeting where Virat Bhatia, you know, Apple's MD in India, he said that China spends $1 trillion on industrial subsidies. I didn't believe him. But 1 week later, economists had a special issue on this where they have computed and given the numbers. The 5% of the GDP in China is spent on industrial subsidies. So the country which spends that much amount is taking India to WTO for our PLI incentives, which are $1 or $2 billion in a whole year for all the, and then China has emerged as the largest trading partner of most countries. It runs trade surplus, consistent, persistent trade surplus with every single country except for raw material exporters. So the pattern which is, there is that import raw materials, export manufactured goods. This is this textbook case of center-periphery, relationships. Rolf Prebisch, was the one who articulated that way back in 1960s. So that is the kind of, trend which is emerging. I was last week in Geneva and learned that now they are trying to bring in WTO a new agenda of work program on industrial policy. So I asked, the colleagues in permanent mission of India, what is the objective? Offensive or defensive? Offensive, they said. Offensive, that is that stop other countries from following industrial policy. So this is what is going on. So now against that background, against that context, how do we go about building our manufacturing sector? So what are our key advantages? So one is our large and fast-growing domestic market, and which gives us opportunities to build world-scale plants. Demographic sweet spot. Rest of the world is graying. We are still having a youthful population. Opportunity to leapfrog because we are late industrializers, so we can build new plants which are more environmentally sustainable. ICT, software and chip design ability, which gives us an advantage, a slight advantage in leveraging the digital revolution, for instance. And the supply chain restructuring, we have heard about China plus one restructuring, but all of that has been upset by now Trump tariffs. I don't know where we are on that, but, so these are some of the key advantages. So now just 5-6 bullets on what we could be doing, because I know that Rakesh has a commitment he has to leave at 12:30 and we want to listen to him. So I will finish, I'll go over it very quickly maybe in 5 minutes now. So recognizing that large and growing domestic market is India's biggest resource, and the way China used its large domestic market for bartering market access. I mean, it told you have access to my market if you produce here. So something like that we need to do. How we do it, of course, we can't do it the way China did, but so we are seeking preferential market access through free trade agreements worldwide, everywhere, Peru to Chile to UAE but why not give preferential access to our own products, to our own market, that you have first access, first preference, So it will also bring FDI if they see that India's market is for its own producers. FDI will also come to produce here. The cheap imports have made huge inroads into India's domestic market, especially for labor-intensive goods. We have been doing a project on labor-intensive industries. Some of my colleagues sitting here are involved in that. sector by sector, and we were looking at just four. So everywhere there is a huge proportion of local demand that is met by cheap Chinese imports. 20% of shoes, India's, total 20% of shoe requirement or shoe market is coming from China. The cheap imitation jewelry, nearly 100% from China. So virtually any mall you go to, you see stacks full of made in China goods. Where are India made goods? And these are products which were made by MSMEs or could be made by MSMEs. So opportunity cost for jobs is enormous. So one thing we are finding is that these imports, the channel or the way they are coming to India are through organized retail. So organized retailers need to be possibly, this is one thought, having studied the performance requirements globally in my time when I was working on FDI, is that asking these retailers that, okay, you import as much as you want, but at as much you import, you have to export from India and buy that from MSMEs. Mr. Shankar mentioned earlier that when organized retailer was opened, that we expected that 30% will be bought from MSMEs. So that supply chain needs to be, value chain needs to be developed. The vendor base has to be developed among MSMEs by the organized retailers. And this is something. It is not in contravention of any WTO agreements. TRIMS agreement applies to trade in goods, not to trade in services. And so I have studied this carefully, that are we breaking any law if we do that? No, none. Labeling requirements are there. India has labeling requirements to declare the origin, where it is coming from. But there is no standardization. So we say that underneath the label, the brand M&S, you say made in where? India, China, wherever. And this use the color coding, red for imports, green for locally produced. So that will at least raise the awareness among the consumers what you are buying. You are buying a domestic product or an imported product. So that is a very small administrative circular that all can do the trick. Then there are certain types of para tariffs. If you don't want to use the tariffs, but some para tariffs could be used to raise the price of the imports. Voluntary export. I mean, these are things which Western world used when Japan was becoming a problem for them. Voluntary export restraints. They negotiated with Japan that you will not export more than this to us. Something like that. Port restrictions. India has used them sometimes, that imports from certain countries will only come to one port and not to others, and there you block it somehow or make it slow. And standards, etc., could also be. So all kinds of non-derivative, there is a whole variety of things one can do. Then trade and GVC participation. We have moved in terms of our share of global exports from 0.5% to 1.8%. It might appear to be reasonable, but compared to what others have achieved, it is, minuscule. And so what China has done, for instance. So the problem is that the geography of trade, there is a growing divergence, that east side is emerging as a major source of imports. West is our major market. But the FTA strategy of India, we have concluded, or we have gone, in preference of giving FTAs with the sources of imports rather than sources of exports. Only now we have concluded an FTA with UK. Now we have expedited one with EU. US is, of course, at this moment, no one knows what one can do about. So leveraging FTAs effectively. And Japan and Korea in particular, I think Rakesh, you were involved in some of them. You chaired from Indian side, I was part of it. We had this hope that, this will bring a lot of investments to India from Japan for exporting back. It hasn't happened except for one or two sectors, especially in labor-intensive industries. For instance, Japan imports $25 billion worth of garments every year, and hardly anything from India. $100 million, is a pathetic. And so they import from China, not from India. And so why we are not able to do that despite having a functional FTA? So these are some of the issues we need to look at. And exchange rate issue already Chair has raised in the beginning, in the morning. And so that was also one point. The FDI and Manufacture Act. So, we have undertaken a lot of reforms, and we believe that improved attractiveness to FDI inflows has happened. When World Bank was measuring this ease of doing business index, now they have abundant. Our rank moved up and all that. And there is evidence in Harvard Business Review that Indian subsidiaries of MNCs are doing better than their parents, consistently. And in our report also, we did some further work on that. Yet, we are an underperformer, and proactive FDI targeting is needed. I think just producing good brochures is not helping. This Invest India or whichever agency, they produce good brochures, which is fine. But that is only one of the starting point. We need to knock the doors of these investors. Our analysis based on 11,000 companies shows that both inward FDI and outward FDI helps them to improve their export competitiveness. And in particular, scales also are important, although not in a linear manner. Outward FDI by Indian companies helps them to emerge as national champions and build global supply chains. So that needs to be encouraged. Augmenting industrial R&D is most critical need of the hour, and Rakesh recently in CII discussion raised this to industry people, why you are not doing, and this is something which is beyond our understanding or any region, why we are not doing this for ourselves when 1,700 GCCs of multinational companies have been set up to take advantage of the skills and national innovation system that exists in the country. So I think some kind of, government has taken some steps. There's a new research foundation, then the corpus for lending for R&D. But people say that the entrepreneurs say that who will borrow for a highly risky and uncertain activity like R&D? So in the past, we had the weighted deductions for R&D. Perhaps it's time to go back to them in addition to what has been done. And a second tier utility model kind of patent system for incremental innovations could also be helpful. Then MSMEs and startups, which form the backbone of Indian economy, I think there are a lot of things which are being done. Spreading the knowledge is one thing, and strengthening the venture capital financing ecosystem, and also a national development bank for term lending to medium scale companies, because larger ones, Rakesh, we discussed this once. For larger ones, the sky is the limit. They can raise capital from anywhere. But for the medium ones, where do they go to? And universal banks, commercial banks are not the place for term lending because there is asset liability mismatch. and focus on priority sectors which fit in our endowments, or advantages, like labor-intensive sectors, skill-intensive sectors, green industries, and new strategic and sunrise industries for different considerations. I won't elaborate because time is short. I want to just go to the final slide. This is the final slide. So we need to also put on the table a kind of a document, because the previous industry resolutions have become grossly outdated for the current context. So a new industrial strategy for inclusive, sustainable and competitive manufacturing sector, which provides some guiding targets like doubling our share in global output rather than manufacturing share in GDP, which is not going to increase as long as services are growing at 7.5 or 8%. Broad principles such as primacy of localization. We haven't said it anywhere that we prefer localization of jobs, local value addition, entrepreneurship, and locally anchored technological capabilities in a WTO consistent manner. We can't, of course, say it, just so we have to find a nice language, and the sectors which will focus on the investment promotion principles. What kind of incentives or tax breaks? Some countries give pioneer industry incentives. Malaysia still does after becoming a high income country. How do we leverage FDI and MNCs and outward FDI? How do we encourage innovative activity and say how critical it is? And trade negotiations to obtain market access and create policy space. Efficient industrial infrastructure, logistics, Gati Shakti, all of them are very important. Competitive exchange rate in real terms, financing for India's rapid manufacturing thrust, and a high-powered architecture, because industrial policy is not a single policy. It covers everything under the sun. And so you need a strong, high-powered coordination institutional setup, which can talk to different, line ministries and institutions. So the whole of government approach, which is needed for fostering industrialization. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, and may I request you to. Sorry, Thank you very much, Nagesh and Mr. Shankar. All of us are old friends for inviting me. But after I finish, you may regret the fact that you invited me. First, I'll just react to a couple of things. One, this manufacturing services issue. Raghuram Rajan, Danny Radrick was mentioned, etc. have convinced ourselves that we are very good at services, we have no future in manufacturing. This is completely and utterly wrong. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. One, in terms of share, Nagesh, the share of services in China's GDP is marginally higher than ours. Okay. Their IT exports are higher than ours. So for India to say, we're not doing manufacturing but services was plain wrong. Okay. Same thing to do with employment. The difference is that we have not done adequate structural transformation of people moving out of agriculture. That is the difference. And we better face it. And it's to do with industrialization. So I think unless this is said loud and clear, that China has greater share of value added and employment in services than we do, we will never figure this out. Okay? We'll keep convincing ourselves that we are a services nation unlike China, which is not correct. Just factually wrong. Yeah. Two, this business of labor intensive. Okay, shirt I'm wearing, 4,000 rupees. Brand Raymond, vertically integrated brand. That is marketing, manufacturing, everything is integrated. I bought it because I thought it's an Indian shirt. It's only when I saw that label at home that it was made in China. Now please tell me, Why cannot India make a 4,000 rupee shirt? It's not cheap. It's not a cheap import, imported by own manufacturer. So I don't agree with a lot of things you said on cheap imports, etc. This is our company, old company, like more than 100-year-old. Ajay is more than 100 years old. Yeah. So there's something wrong. And unless I think the research that we do must try and understand what is at the root. Ajay, you said we have to look at the causes of the disadvantages, right? And not give subsidies. I think that is what is important in the research. We must find out what is wrong. And increasing scale is the key. We keep on saying MSME. I think Professor Panagaria has said this 100 times actually, because he's done more research on this than I have. And you look at the charts that he gives in terms of comparative sizes of our firms and Chinese firms. Okay, and that is the key. We keep on saying MSME, policy for MSME. So I'm sorry, but he was much later. He became Ministry Secretary, much later than I was there. But this is what I keep saying. So much for my rant. Okay, I just want to give some remarks on just concepts of industrial policy. Yes, an exchange rate. I'm so glad Suman Berry brought it up. You brought it up. Real exchange rate is really the key. And again, since I managed it for 7 years, 2002, 2009, I can say with confidence it can be managed. Yes, I agree that it is more difficult now than it used to be, but it can be managed. And RBI staff know how to manage it. Maybe they've forgotten by now. Let me just give you a few remarks now. One, that a little short background Indian industrial policy. Until the Indian industrial policy has sort of always been to do with regulation and licensing. And 1948, 1956, 1969, also 1991 were all to do either increasing regulation. 91 we decreased deregulation. And in fact, the first time I met Nagesh was in 93, 94, when both of us were for about a year at the UN Institute of New Technology, United Nations University Institute of New Technology, UN INTEC in Maastricht. And after having done the 91 reforms, I thought, ab kya kare? Ab industry policy kya karna chahiye? That's why I took off for a year and went to Maastricht to study European industrial policy. And the point is that we are not equipped in our government structure to know what to do positive things. And this is because the whole structure of bureaucracy from the colonial times, their job was to regulate and control. We did change the bureaucracy, of which Mr. Shankar was a distinguished member, that they basically trained to control. That's why we have viceroys in districts called collectors. They are viceroys. And we haven't changed that. But his point there is that to do positive things, you need domain competence. And whereas most of our IS officers, etc., are very competent, okay, that's how they've got in, because it's huge competition, all right? But they're not allowed to have domain competence. It's not their fault. And unless we do that, we are not able to do positive things. So, I won't go through the history, but we did all the regulations starting from 1948 Industrial Policy Resolution, the IDR Act of 1951, all to do with controlling. MRTP Act of 1969, everything was controlling. What was interesting is there were, from 1960s onwards, there was a number of Indian government committees who said thing was not working. And what they always conclude, therefore, I will do better and do more control. So that's a general point. And therefore, it is worth for research institutions to think about what are the positive things we can do. Nagesh suggested a lot. One thing I completely disagree with him, unfortunately, despite being good friends, is everything is said on controlling imports. Yeah. We are not part of this is why FDI does not come for exports. Unless we cannot be part of global supply chains, unless we have much freer imports, fewer regulations. Biggest disaster is QCOs, which you mentioned actually. And putting further restraints, alternative voluntary export restraints that you mentioned, in the early 80s from Japan. US put voluntary export restraint because there were too many Japanese cars coming in. The voluntary export restraints on number of Japanese cars. So what did Japan do? They upgraded the quality of Japan's cars, make them larger, much larger unit value. So instead of the import of value coming down, it went up. So that's what happens in these kinds of, we cannot again go into the control business, Nagesh. Leave that to the IS fellows, not economists like you. Economists like you, but say, look, ye ho raha hai, ye duniya mein kiya hai. Don't listen to these fellows. I'm not talking about you, Ajay, because you're different. Because उनका काम ही है control करना. कि हाँ मैं जाके देखूंगा. What has PLI done? How many sectors, Nagesh? 14 sectors. So there are 14 shops open now in Udyog Bhavan and ancillary ministries. सारी दुकानें बंद की थी हम लोग 1991 में. अब सब खुल गई हैं. Out of 14 sectors, what has succeeded? One. Cell phones. I'm on a board of a company that does that. What is the value added? 4%. Okay? Yes, employment has increased because you're manufacturing, but there's no technology increase. All right? So you have to think about these things. Exchange rate, I think, is very important. One point I would make on tariffs, which Mr. Trump doesn't seem to understand, which is that the tariffs came from a time, which is this very interesting, how long it takes for people to understand and change their minds. How did tariffs start? In the era until the mid-70s, when we all had fixed exchange rates. So that when you became uncompetitive for something, the only thing you could do was to raise tariffs. The exchange rate didn't move. The times have changed now 50 years. I'm talking globally, not India, globally. That when the country becomes uncompetitive, the exchange rate moves. In India also, given that our current account deficit is less than 2%, right? Our exchange rate for economy-wide fashion is pretty market determined, okay? The problem is, as was mentioned, you have about 3% of GDP regular remittances and 3% of GDP services, net services exports. So you have 6% of GDP net surpluses from the service side, including remittances. Therefore, you can have about 7 to 8% of GDP merchandise trade deficit, okay? And that's telling you that the exchange rate is heavily biased against industry. So Suman's remarks, your remarks, Ajay's remarks, absolutely damn right. And that is what we have to correct. How to do that is not very easy, but it can be done. The main new initiative that the government has done, as we mentioned, is PLI. I'm afraid that I don't agree with it at all. Because what does it do? First of all, PLI reasoning is what? Indian industries are disadvantaged. Again, Ajay, you mentioned that. So what have you done? The government is telling the private sector कि आप disadvantaged हैं. अगर हम आपको help नहीं करेंगे, I'm sorry, I should not speak in Hindi since you're here. It's okay. What have you told industry? You are uncompetitive, not your fault. Okay? It's because you're disadvantaged. So now industry is very happy. We are disadvantaged, what can we do? So every sector is coming to government, please give me money. To my mind, it's a disgrace. We don't spend on health. We don't spend on education. We don't spend agriculture R&D as much as we should. But we must give money to fat cats. Biggest disgrace, to my mind, is giving money to Apple. It is a company with the highest profits, capital value in the world. And Indian taxpayers giving them money. I don't understand this. We should all rise. I'm sorry, I member the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, so I shouldn't speak like this. But I can't restrain myself. But seriously, I think we have to think about these things. That we should do in this policy, I have no difficulty. So what has happened, one thing I should say is that there's how the Southeast Asia, East Asia, including China, that is Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, etc., how they grew, there's still a debate on how much industrial policy was the reason and how much not. There's a whole two camps, and there's never been a solution to those two camps. But one thing that was clear from those countries was that they all became competitive in terms of exports. That was the key. That a lot of the incentives, whether it was Japan, whether it was Korea, whether it was Taiwan, came automatically. If exported, they did not choose sectors, except Korea did in the heavy chemical industry phase. But otherwise, the test was, can you export? And domestic competition. Why do you have, I don't know how many Japanese major car manufacturers, all competitive? Because they had domestic competition also. And they could become domestic competition because they were internationally competitive. So, whereas I don't, it's not, I think it's some mixture, quite frankly, of other macro policies, etc., exchange rate, and domestic policies. But the main thing is competition, and particularly proving competition through being export competitive. So what is interesting now is that from the advanced economies, as Nagesh documented, US, Europe, etc., they're now doing everything they told all of us for ages. Don't be stupid. Having been in the government at that time, we were lectured by IMF, World Bank, everyone for this all the time. Okay, they're doing exactly what they told us not to do. Now, one thing I should say is that particularly in the US, a lot of the argument has arisen from and this is how it's important for us, because how bad research can make very, 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 very bad policy. Among the people who have put out the idea that US has lost because of China's unfairness, okay, is David Otter. He's published work, so I'm not saying anything wrong in a sense, of MIT, who's shown how many jobs were lost. I read his paper just yesterday, a key paper. He shows that from 1998 or something, I forget the date, till 2011, I forget the exact dates, 5.8 million manufacturing jobs were lost in the US. He also done careful research, he's a careful fellow. How many were due to China? 10% of that, 58,000. Okay. Is that in his paper? So it's not because of China. Also, you look at the long series of manufacturing jobs in the US as a proportion, it's been coming down steadily since 1950. There's no kink in 2000. In fact, there's a bit flattening actually. So what I'm saying, but his work has been very influential in convincing most of America actually the rest of the world even, that it's because China's unfairness they've lost manufacturing jobs. He doesn't say at all, right, how many service sector jobs were gained because of huge imports, retailing, car dealers, car repairers. I mean, you can name hundreds of things, accountants, everyone involved in trade. He doesn't mention how many service sector jobs were right. Second, he doesn't mention that US unemployment has been low at 4 to 5% for the last 25 years, which is unknown in history. He doesn't mention that US per capita income in the last 25 years has gone up much more than any other country. You know, the ratio of US per capita income in Japan was about little less than 1. That is, Japan had higher per capita income in 2000. Now it's the US is more than double. And the same kind of similar, not same, not as bad ratios to almost all. So what I'm saying is that researchers, economists' job, a serious job, is to tell the truth and be careful in how you write stuff, because people just draw the wrong conclusions from. I mean, I really feel that how can US say we have been victimized by the rest of the world, so they've been unfair to us, so we must now retaliate. Okay, this is not just Trump; it's generally Biden also, as you're saying, right? If your per capita has been rising much more than others, how have you lost? Okay, so I'm saying this is very important to tell the truth. Now, in terms of some of the U.S. acts that you mentioned, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, etc. A lot of I'm not defending them, but a lot of the subsidies were for R&D, for training, some tax incentives, but there was not very little in terms of portion of state subsidies. What should India's international policy be? I'll conclude in a few minutes, couple of minutes. It should not be picking winners. Okay, you have 14 sectors in PLI. One has succeeded. Now you can say, well, we didn't pick winners. We had 14, so jo nikala acha hai. But how much money are you spending? Okay, what impact are you having on the mindset of industry? I would like private sector to say, कि हम कर सकते हैं. We can do. What is wrong with us? Nothing wrong with us. We can be competitive. We are smart. There are 1,800 GCC center, whatever number you say. Therefore, what is up? There's no problem. Instead, we are telling them, no, you can't be competitive unless I give you money. This is very important in terms of what you do to people's mindsets through policy. There's no, in the PLI, there's no incentive for higher productivity. Okay, none. There's no R&D conditions imposed, which I believe I would be very much for PLI. If you said I'll give you this, but so much you must spend on R&D or technology development or skill development, etc. I think that'll be terrific. And so it must be geared, any industrial policy must be geared to increasing productivity and exports. This is also the biggest puzzle, which was mentioned by Suman also, that after 1991, biggest focus was in industry policy. And as has been said, biggest disappointment has been manufacturing value add has not grown. So I don't quite understand. Now, one thing is, Nagesh also mentioned, no increment in R&D proportion over GDP from the private sector. We had thought that because there was no competition earlier, there was no incentive for them to R&D. That was removed, but still it made no difference. Labor-intensive sectors are not done well. I think it's a lot to do with the exchange rate, but it's still something worth discussing. And it's very interesting that, you know, when we talk about industrial policy these days, we talk about high-tech sectors, okay? And you mentioned all of them. Very little to do with what we can do for labor-intensive industries. What's the problem? Look at wages, okay? Our average wage is about 15 to 20,000 rupees a month, manufacturing sector for workers. China is about 9 to 10 lakhs a month. No, sorry, 9 to 12, about a lakh a month or more. Bangladesh, but similar, 10,000 to 20,000. Vietnam, more than 25,000 rupees. Thailand, more than 40,000. Indonesia is similar to us, 17 to 20. So my point is that, look, we are the lowest wage country. And within this, we can't compete in making shirts. Why? You've got to ask that. Researchers have to ask that question. Where is the problem? It is true, what again Ajay said, that we had handicapped ourselves by small-scale reservations, and they didn't go to about 2010, finally. Okay? Many of us, I was a member of the Abid Hussain Small-Scale Industry Committee, mid-90s we recommended removal of small-scale reservations. Yes, that's a big issue. The question is, why haven't people jumped after that? It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Finally, let me just end that the government's policies, we want to do FTAs, also Nagesh mentioned, with Western countries, because they are where the market is. But face the facts. US will continue to have about 2% growth next 20 years. Europe will have 0. So your market is not growing there. Okay? You'll have to displace others. Where is the market going to grow next 20 years? ASEAN plus 3 plus South Asia. 4 billion people. Even if they grow at 4% a year, they're going to buy many more shirts, many more shoes, a lot more furniture, a lot more everything that you can see in this room, you can see in any home, you can see in Walmart. But we just refuse to concentrate on Asia. That's where the market is. China. People talk about the exports. How much do they import? 2.4 trillion. 2.4 trillion. How much do we export to them? About a billion? I forget how much it is. I also looked at our ranking. We are number 31 in the exports to China among countries, which is the country above us, a huge country called Ireland. Why can't we export more than Ireland to China? This is the research we need to do. and concentrate what can we do, look at what do they import, ASEAN, China, etc. What are we not exporting? What is the problem? Why are we not exporting? Do they have NTBs or whatever against us, especially, which I doubt. But they may, I don't know, I haven't looked at it. But this is research we need to do. Because that's where the market, next 20 years, 2/3 of global growth will come from the region that I've mentioned. But we are looking at, because we've been colonials, we are still looking at the colonists. It's a huge demand out there, which is also, I say, that we have not missed the bus on labor-intensive manufactured exports. So industrial policy should concentrate on greater competitiveness, R&D, technical development, labor-intensive sectors, and based on export success, and concentrate on doing. We should not have exited RCEP. We should reconsider. Of course, we need to do safeguards, whatever we have to do. We've got to do that, and we have to think of CPTPP. If UK is joining, it's not nowhere near the Pacific, but they're joining this. They have joined the CPTPP. We've not even applied. And of course, overall, sector agnostic infrastructure were mentions, public R&D. One thing, universities. The biggest success of China, the root is improvement in universities, bringing out people who are very well qualified. They're reaching the top of the research ladders, and that's how R&D takes. I'll give you one example. I chaired a committee on railways in 1999-2000, then another on transport policy in 2010 to 14. One of the things I found was that I just went to China for a holiday, actually, 2-week holiday. No one goes to China for holidays, I did. And it's amazing. The railway network, beyond belief, speeds of 300 kilometers an hour, 350 kilometers an hour, etc. How do they do it? They had five research institutes in the railways, all public sector, but they competed against each other. 5,000 professionals in each institute. We have one RDSO, not one PhD. Okay, not one PhD in RDSO. Okay, who gets posted to RDSO? Railways officers who people don't like. These are railways people tell me. I didn't, of course, I have no knowledge.
Dumping ground.
So what I'm saying is that these are the things you've got to concentrate on. Otherwise, you can't become competitive, right? We are sort of very interesting. Yes, Mr. Trump has done something as India by doing restrictions on H-1B. Should we be sad about it or happy about it? Why do we want to export our best brains? I mean, I don't understand, right? Yes, he's done a nasty thing against us, that's true. I mean, last fellow to refer Mr. Trump, but I'm thinking, हमको सोचना चाहिए ना कि हमारे interest में क्या है, right? Now, as a response to the H-1B action by Trump, China has announced people will give K visas to technical people to come. So, I mean, that's an interesting response. I went to give a lecture at the Peking University, the National School of Development. We think the language is a problem in China. As a tourist, it's not very easy, okay, without a guide with you all the time. But as far as Peking University is concerned, National School of Drama, NSD in India is National School of Drama, so I keep saying National School of Drama, is National School of Development, okay. I had an audience of 100, 150 people. All, I assume, fluent English because they listened to me carefully, didn't walk out because I was speaking in English. But what I'm saying is that it's interesting on their concentration on really developing human resources, getting expertise, and then utilizing that. Women, you had mentioned, that's very, very important. Or Suman had mentioned, or I think. Also, in terms of trade, mutual recognition agreements to do with standards, etc. That's very important. So I can go on forever, but I have to go for another meeting, which I'm already late for. But I'm sorry that I've become, as I age, I become more used to speaking my mind, because I was restrained for many years in the government. So now, even though I'm associated in some sense, I still feel that it's our job as economists and researchers. And I'll just end with one of my mentors or professors was Professor Arnold Harberger, A.C. Harberger, who's from the Chicago School, very famous. But he was a fantastic teacher. And as it happened, I kept in contact with him. When I first appointed as economic advisor in the government, I got in touch with him. I said, he advised a lot of Latin American countries. And I said, any advice for me? He says, remember, you're being paid to be economic advisor, not political advisor. So your job as economic advisor or as economist is to give straight economic advice. Someone else is paid to make decisions based on other issues which are important. But what is your job? Of course, when I became Secretary of Economic Affairs, I had to change, but I found that I was not good at it, so I left within 8 months. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And I have very high expectations from you, but you are in good form today.
So, yeah, yes, sir. So, I'll.
Yeah. May I now request Dr. Cristiano Passini, Director of the UNIDO Regional Office in Delhi. He will bring an international perspective, and an international perspective which will certainly bring great value to our understanding of issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, it's indeed great honor for us to be here. I mean, Nagesh, thank you so much for the invitation. I don't know if to thank you or being a little bit upset because you put me in a panel of super experts on policies, and I was very much learning actually from you, from what is the experience it's for India. But I mean, I think it's as all the UN officials, they gave me also a speech, but I will try to follow the major lines, but I think also I will try also to remember that I was director of the policy divisions in Vienna for 2 years before coming to India. So I will probably try to get deep on what I learned also there, to try to give something interesting after so much rich contributions from the other speakers. For us, I mean, I think you know UNIDO. I mean, we are the only specialized agency focused on sustainable industrializations. Often we are probably the closest to the private sector because we have to work with industries. We have also global roles within the SDGs because we are also custodian of 6 SDG 9 indicators. So we have a mandate. At the time I was director of the Policy Statistics Department to report on how is the progress globally on SDG 9 and also try to also distill the data into lessons learned to distribute to the different member states. I have to say that, I mean, it's the part which I found particularly interesting in the discussion is about the role of industrializations. I mean, and it's not so straightforward. I can tell you from a global perspective, there is a certain member states that acknowledge the fact that industrialization is crucial for growth and development, but I've been serving in countries where I've been told by senior policymakers, I can not only concentrate in industrialization, I concentrate on service, on agriculture, otherwise the economy is no growth. But for us, I mean, it's at the time for the policy, when I was in policy, I had always to remember 2 datas, which I think is pretty important also for discussion of today. How much also is industrialization besides the contribution to growth? They were, I remember One data is that the 69th growth episodes, the majority of growth episodes from countries were due to manufacturing. So there was a general, we could have said that economic growth was the sister of industrial growth, or the brother, or the son, and so on. So it's very difficult to get economic growth without industrial growth. But there was other two numbers which I always try to repeat, and it probably goes very much on the narrative we had from Suman and also from Nagesh, on the importance of manufacturing for social development. My former statistical department, we're doing every quite few years how much is contributing manufacturing sectors to jobs creations. And we had always this kind of data, that the one jobs in manufacturing sector contributes to 2.2, now this is the latest number, jobs in other sectors. So it has a multiplier factor. So if you're looking, if your policy priority is to create jobs, for sure, you have to look at the forward linkages. Indeed, this is based on past histories, this is based on regressive, and you are all researchers and economists, you know that we normally draw lessons learned based on the past and the future is different. But I have to say that these numbers has been always there. So the manufacturing sector had a huge potential for job creations. And another fact that probably goes on the importance of the sector is that often is connected to the capacity of technology innovations. 60% of the global green patents are coming directly from the manufacturing sectors. R&D investment is indeed very important. It's an easy way for obviously push innovations, but the majority of the innovation is coming directly from the manufacturing companies. I mean, you mentioned Apple, but you can mention many other things. So overall, if you're looking for a solution on the technological side, if you're looking for a solution for job, you cannot but look to the manufacturing sector. But indeed, and that we have heard today, the manufacturing sector is changing dramatically. But let's say that if we look at the past 20 years, the megatrends, at least from the UNIDO perspective, has never changed. They will remain the same, some accelerated, some decelerated, but overall they remain more or less the guiding lights, at least for us at the time when we were looking at industrial development and industrial policies. And the first two, I think it's something that we are living and we have been heard extensively from the contribution of the previous speakers. First, the energy and green transitions, that has been happening, and it has been happening because manufacturing sectors now needs to develop and grow within the overall boundary of our ecospheres. And there is a lot of, if you ask me this question 1 year ago, how much this trend was accelerated, I was saying very much so. And then after Mr. T or Mr. Trump, I think it's going a little bit to slow down. But the trend is there. I mean, there is still a general transition, energy transition that is happening behind the political discourse that is unfolding. The second, the acceleration of technology innovations, and particularly AI. That is, I believe, one of the most disruptive. Has been happening since quite some times, but I think has been accelerating dramatically. I think there has been a tripling of patents of AI in the last 5 years. But obviously, with the advance of large language model, Internet of Things, automation in manufacturing, you will see it's happening. You've mentioned a lot the country China, and I was also coming back very recently for China. And I was shown this video where robots were dancing, which is a little bit disturbing to see it, but they say that the kind of type of automations and advancement in robotic and manufacturing. The third one is what we call it in the UNIDO's way, the reconfiguration of global supply chain, increased regionalizations. I think you have talked very extensively on that. We do believe is partly geopolitical, and partly in acknowledgement of the economic evolutions where the economic barycenter of the world is moving to west towards east. In the last 30 years, a lot of manufacturing value additions has moved from west to east. I normally share, I don't have it here, but I normally share the graph to my colleagues in the United Nations systems, showing the productions map in 2000 and the production map in 2025. I was seeing that around half of the goods that now you see all around most probably is coming from Asia. Before, it was coming mainly from Western Europe or the US. So there's been a dramatic shift, and this shift has brought with it a lot of consequences on jobs, on narratives. We heard them below before all the discussions that you're bringing out a lot of jobs, but this is not true. Actually, I mean, I also believe that it is not true. It's depending on the change of production pattern that we have seen unfolding. And the fourth one, it is, and I think it's also relevant to India a little bit, is the demographic transitions. From the UNIDO perspective, demographic transitions is more, we see that Africa is going to triple their population by 2050 versus the number of 2020, and we see a lot of aging coming in developed countries. This will change the base for doing manufacturing, so will have an impact. But in all these trends, at least something that UNIDO has been always advocated, the policies needs to be obviously future-looking, future-oriented. So if a government needs to be successful to frame industrial policy, it should be able to have policy which are able to leverage all these mega trends in the positive way. And so they will need to be obviously forward-looking. They need to look at the endowment, and especially in strong collaboration with the private sectors, and need to make sure that, again, read the moment in the proper time, in the proper way. The lessons from industrialization we have seen in South Asia was mainly based on an export-led industrializations. We heard also the previous speakers speaking about that, in a trade environment which was completely different. And now the type of industrialization you have to do is unfolding in a very strange trade environment, which is going very much towards, let's say, fragmentations and bilateralization. So the path will be different, and the solution needs in a way to be different. In general, from UNIDO sides, I think there has been 5 areas of actions we recommend also for framing industrial policies. The first to work very much on the infrastructures for manufacturing and industrializations, both physical, digital, and quality infrastructures. Allow me to spend a few words on the quality infrastructures because they are key specifically if you want to link companies, industries, MSMEs to markets, especially or to global supply chain. We think that the standards, the infrastructure for standardization, for certification accreditations, these are keys, especially at country level, to make sure that companies can access easily everything to then be able to export to the target markets. Mutual recognition also of standards is extremely important. It's something that we have been discussed. And the second, which is something that UNIDO has been pushing globally, was the concept of eco-industrial parks. I think is widely recognized as an issue, as a model for helping supporting industrialization. China was one of the examples, but there were many in South Asia and then in Europe. But the ideas that we are trying to now, let's say, propose at the global level is the idea of an industrial park, which is also something that take care about the social and environmental aspects of the infrastructures for manufacturing. And the second is something that have been also widely discussed, the importance of skills for manufacturing and capabilities to be aligned with the future demand. This also, we also mainly focus on technical skills, specifically for manufacturing sectors. Any kind of vocational training centers that might give the tools for the futures. This is something that will need to be on the policies for the country. And also the upscaling the industrial innovation ecosystem. We don't know how the world will look like in 5 years. Nagesh, you know very well, it's going to be very difficult to read the futures, but at least preparing the ecosystem for this uncertainty, making sure that entrepreneurs and peoples, and not only infrastructure entrepreneurs and people, have the right skills, but also the capacity to adopt and absorb the new technology. Will be key, and probably goes also on the discussion of today of the our chief guest when he was saying bringing more people and increasing the productivity, specifically women, around the productivity of laborers here in India. Another things that we are always advising is also about the financing the industrial transformation. Successful case of industrial policy, industrial transformations are because the government has put a lot of financial backing on supporting the policies that they were framing, the collaboration with Development Bank, designing any kind of green mechanism. Also us here in India within the projects we are having, specifically in supporting micro and small enterprises, and pushing some support for clean technologies. We are advising to creating revolving fund to de-risk the small companies specifically to access this to access the technology. Final, my last, let's say, considerations about India. I mean, I think we have heard a lot of amazing suggestions. The only thing I feel to say is that I've been serving in Latin America, discussing about industrial policy, served also in Europe for a period, and also now here. And I see that the discussions around policies and what is right and what is wrong, it's always very contextualized. But the most important is to have in these conversations. It's important to have, let's say, tangible, I think, policies and initiatives. Here, India has a lot to make in India PLI. Everything can be improved, but as long there is something, there is a clear will from the government and the private sector to evolve in the manufacturing journey and to support the manufacturing, this is for us extremely, extremely promising, and is already a good indication that you're going definitely in the right directions. From UNIDO side, we obviously have been accompanying the journey of India for 60 years. Next year also will be our 60th anniversary, so we'll be always happy to continue supporting you, either with tangible solutions, but also contributing to these discussions, which I found personally extremely rewarding for me, and part of this amazing learning journey that I'm having here in India. Thank you, Nagesh. Thank you, everybody, for contributing.
Thank you very much, and I'm so glad to hear you and get your perspective. May I now request Mr. Ishtiaq Ahmed, who is the program director in the Niti Aayog, which is his formal introduction here. But I would like to add that I've been an admirer of his, and he is in many ways in the driving seat for evolving some of the very good initiatives that we are seeing coming out from government. And he certainly is a great believer in India's potential as a very successful industrializing economy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Sir, I was told that I have to talk something on manufacturing in the country. So that is where I try to confine myself. And also I would like to touch upon certain areas. So there are certain vices, whether it has worked or hasn't worked. So just to give a certain level of clarity on those areas. So thank you once again for inviting me. And when we talk of the manufacturing sector in the country, we all know that it is not performing to its potential, and it has a lot of potential to grow. And a number of interventions the government of India has taken, and those interventions have also been taken at the state level. So if we look at the infrastructure investment, that's one of the great catalyzers for efficient manufacturing. Massive infrastructure has happened across the areas, whether it's airports, roads, the ports, everywhere massive infrastructure investment is happening. So in fact, in 2014, when we tried to bring in ease of doing business in the country in a very serious way, our ranks were somewhere around 150, and every time these rankings used to come, and our reaction used to be the methodologies are not right, we could have done better, rather than participating and engaging with the World Bank. But in 2014, we started engaging with the World Bank, and there were certain systemic reforms which were undertaken. And by 2020, our rank had improved to 63. And had it continued, maybe it would have improved further. What I mean to say that a lot of work was done on ease of doing business as well. So it's one thing to get a good rank when it comes to the ease of doing business ranking, but also important to actually bring changes on ground. That is where the DPIT, the government of India, they started doing on BRAP, Business Reform Action Plan, and that is where most of the changes happen at the ground level. So it's not that everything has been done, but a lot has been done. So in fact, around 2010 or so, sir, you have been secretary there, you know, sir, how much of FDI regime was under control. At one point in time, around 80% of the FDI which is coming in the country was coming under approval. Today, it's only 3 to 4% that that much comes under approval. The rest of the FDI which is coming in the country is under automatic route. One important intervention was the public procurement policy, which was laid down by the government to encourage domestic manufacturing, and in areas it had worked very well. Now, a lot of question is raised about questions, some kind of admiration is also mentioned about the PLI scheme. So let's not try to solve all problems of the manufacturing through PLI scheme, or let's to say problem of the country. A PLI scheme was a very, very focused intervention. I have been part of making the PLI scheme. So the kind of objectives PLI scheme had was to bring a size and scale in the country. It was not meant for small players. So idea was to create global champions, domestic global champions, bring size and scale, participate in the global value chain, and bring investment to cutting edge technology. It never was meant to solve all problems of the manufacturing sector, but create big global champions in the country. That was. So the MSMEs were supposed to benefit out of it, but not directly through a PLI. They were going to benefit out of it by participating in the value chain. And if you look at when it came to the implementation, certain sectors like food processing sector and in the pharmaceutical sector, actually a lot of MSMEs were chosen as beneficiaries. So it has benefited directly a number of MSMEs. So if we look at some of the figures, so what we talk of, what Sir mentioned about one scheme has successful, it's a topper who is noticed. But there are many which are passing with distinctions. We don't take note of them. I can mention some of them. Food processing sector PLI is doing very well. Pharmaceutical sector PLI is doing very well. Auto sector has PLI has got a lot of investment. Telecom sector PLI is doing very well. So number of and pharma has 3 PLI scheme. Electronic sector has 3 PLI. So number of PLI schemes are doing very well. It's one thing that we notice only the toppers. So getting back to the manufacturing issue in the country. So over the years, what has happened that our share to the manufacturing was around 14 to 15%, around 14, 15, it went up to 17%, now it has gone down to below 13%. So it's one thing that services sector has grown faster and our manufacturing share has not grown that much. But it's also a fact that manufacturing sector has not performed to its potential, and there are a number of reasons, and there are a lot of things which have been done, which I just mentioned, and that indirectly catalyzes the manufacturing. But why it hasn't done that very well? So we have a lot of interventions like Make in India initiative was launched, and which was in a different level. You are doing ease of doing business, you are doing public procurement policies, different ministries have their programs. It was highly distributed or dispersed kind of Make in India initiative. Then the PLI scheme, then you have National Industrial Corridor, which is developing industrial infrastructure across the country in the states. The Semicon India mission was launched. Then National Single Window System has been launched. So there's a PM Gati Shakti program, then electronic components scheme. So there are a number of initiatives which have been launched when it comes to the manufacturing sector of the country. But still, we see that there are success stories that in toy manufacturing has happened, in electronic sector it has happened, in automobile sector it is happening. But there are areas of concern. We are having around 17-18% of the global population, and our manufacturing share is just 3%, which is far, far below the expectation. We are around $500 billion. Our share should be far, far higher. And if we have to grow to 25% of the manufacturing share to the GDP by 2035, growth rate required is around 16.8 to 17%. So that's a very, very high ask, and we have to do a lot of things to achieve, to be even closer to that target. And why it hasn't happened despite so much of initiative the government of India has undertaken, the states have taken, the private sector is also participating. So I could list out five reasons. So there is a certain lack of integrated strategy. There should be integration in our strategy. For instance, the central government is doing something, the state government is doing something, the private sector. So there should be a lot of synergy in the initiative. The central government, the state government, the private sector do, number one thing. Second is that we are not that fast in execution. So there should be speed in the execution of our initiatives. We announce certain things, it takes ages to implement on the ground. So there has to be really fast and quick execution. The cross-cutting enablers have to be worked out, whether it's MSME, the R&D was very much mentioned, technology was very mentioned. When it comes to the competitiveness of any product, it happens of two ways. One is that you bring the high level of quality and be the cost competitive. That is where the technology gets very, very important. And there should be a standard roadmap. It should not be somebody is doing something. There is no standard roadmap. If you want to address the problem, the manufacturing have the standard roadmap. And lastly, the fragmented execution that is where we are not able to actually achieve what we are capable of. In around the Make in India time, the Make in China was also launched in 2015 or so. So the Make in China was headed by Ma Kai, who was vice premier at that point in time. They clearly prioritized 15 sectors. They assigned responsibility to different ministries and departments, and they set clear targets. And whether it was a semicon, it was automobile, it was EV, it was robotics, they had clear-cut targets, and they kept on executing on time. And there were certain failures even in their targets, but they achieved most of it because of the speed they executed, the kind of responsibility they had given to each and every department, and they have been fairly successful. So Vietnam has another story, but their size of the economy of Vietnam is much, much smaller. But what needs to be done for manufacturing if the way we in Niti Ayog are working, or we are being part of these government deliberations? So what needs to be done is that there has to be three levels we need to address. There has to be an institutional structure. There's the National Manufacturing Mission, which was announced in the last budget. So what it entails that despite so much of effort towards the manufacturing, it hasn't reached the kind of potential it is capable of. So we need to do something different, something more concerted and with more intensity. So firstly, there should be an institutional structure which should try to address the manufacturing problem. Whether that institute, because it's a mission, there has to be a mission director, there have to be a sectoral or thematic kind of verticals who should actually try to address the manufacturing problem. Second is that what should be done, how you are going to solve. You can be having the institutional structure. So what we believe that if you want to solve the problem of Indian manufacturing sector in the country, you have to have the thematic approach, the sectoral approach. If you get to the sectors, you actually get to the clusters. If you get to the clusters, if you look at India's 70-80 clusters, the country may be having around 70-80% of the Indian manufacturing. If you try to solve the problem of the 20-30 top clusters, you solve the problem of half of the manufacturing sector in the country. Now, if you want to solve the problem of the textile sector, there's a Tirupur, there's a Ludhiana, all those. You get into the automobile sector, you have Chennai cluster, then Faridabad cluster, Bangalore cluster. So you get to the cluster, try to solve the problem. When you go to the cluster, you have two kinds of issues. One is that there is a sectoral issue and there is a sector agnostic issue. Now I give you the example. If you get to the chemical sector, there are certain areas which are very specific to the chemical sector. For instance, the PCP areas. They have not been populated. The infrastructure is not up to date. Port infrastructure is not up to date. There is no warehousing capacity to the extent needed. If you go to the electronic sector, the problem is something else. It's not about the port infrastructure. It's basically about participation in the global value chain, because our share in the DVA is around 14% or 20%, depends on the kind of product it is. We need to increase it. 15 years down the line, before, even in China, their share DVA in the mobile manufacturing was hardly 10 to 12%. Now they are about 35%. So electronic sector would have a different problem. You get to the textile sector will have a different problem. It has more of a problem of the raw material availability as competitive prices. So there are sector specific issues as well as sector agnostic issues. So finally, what I would like to say, when it comes to solving the manufacturing problem, we have to think that what is the cost disability of manufacturing in the country, how that can be done. So PLI has been one of the interventions. Through it, we try to address the cost disability in a limited period of time. By that time, they are expected to achieve a scale and they can sustain themselves. Second important thing is we need to invest in R&D. Our R&D expenditure is just 0.7%. The global average is even 2.5%, 3% by those economies which are far higher size than we have. And then infrastructure investment. So there's a lot of infrastructure investment which has happened, but when it comes to the industrial infrastructure, we talk of only a few top developed industrial states. If you look at even the state of Uttar Pradesh, if you go beyond Noida or Greater Noida, you have very, very small industrial estates. If you want to solve those, so typically if you have a smaller industrial estates, you cannot get big anchor investors. So developing good industrial estates, even in those states which have not so far developed, is very, very important. And old industrial infrastructure was developed in old state industrial development corporation. They don't have that level of infrastructure facility. That also needs to be upgraded. Tax and tariff. That's one area which the competitors have created certain advantage for themselves. We need to address that. And two more important things which have also been formed as mandates of the National Manufacturing Mission is future ready workforce. Our workforce need to be industry aligned, because the kind of training and skills we are providing, that should be industry suited. And finally, and that's probably very, very important aspect, is the MSMEs. So MSMEs, they make around 70 million units. If you leave out MSMEs, there are just 15,000 big enterprises. So they control around 30% of the your GDP, 36% of the manufacturing GDP, and they make around 45% of the export. So they are very, very significant. They provide around 30 crore of employment. So creating a vibrant, empowered, and dynamic MSME is very important. So solving manufacturing problem needs a lot of action. There's no single pill to it. There are a lot of areas we need to work. What is needed is integrated strategy on part of the center, state, and the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive and very clear explanation and articulation of what is happening and what needs to happen. With your permission, may I say a few words? I'll go up and speak. I had, when the session began, I had referred to the fact that the world as we know it has ended thanks to Trump, and the world of globalization and the WTO regime is over. We are back to a mercantilist era. Unfortunately, economic history is not a very popular discipline. So not many people know of the mercantilist policies that were practiced in the pre-free trade, pre-globalized trading system created by the United States. So I will give just 2-3 examples to give you the range of possibilities which were there and were utilized. So I referred to the East India Company as the first global MNC. They created an empire, which we know about. But what they did with trade is something not many of us know. So they created a market in China using state power for opium. They made India the largest producer of opium in the world. And they made an enormous fortune out of opium trading. They introduced other crops in India, indigo, which led to the major part of our freedom struggle. Then they were able to repeat to us what China is supposed to do to the rest of the world. So our share of manufacturing in the pre-industrial economy was enormous. Bengal produced the maximum number of textiles in the world in value, had the highest population in that. The industrialized goods came from UK and this was destroyed, and Bengal became extremely poor. So now if I look at the world today, and if I want to step back and look at a slightly bigger picture, the economy which is ascendant and is clearly dominant, as came out in a presentation slide, is China. Now China has surplus capacity, it has competitive capacity, it is the cheapest producer of the world, it's the factory of the world, the way England was in the latter half of the 19th century. So you take a very purely theoretical view, then we are the economy with the largest population, the maximum growth in demand. China has surplus capacity. The perfect equilibrium is that we provide the market for the surplus capacity and we get cheap goods, which we are getting from China, and their surplus capacity is utilized, and in some way there is a very satisfactory economic equilibrium. But we should forget about jobs in India. Now let us look at the US. The US has come to the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, that they need infant industry protection of very high tariffs. You brought it up very clearly that they want us and the rest of the world to import goods from the US duty-free, even import goods if they are not cheap, as they are trying to push us with energy, that you buy expensive shale oil. And they will try and keep their markets closed so they can create manufacturing jobs. Now, these are the two largest economies of the world. So I'm referring to this to draw home the fact that India today has enormous potential, but it faces a very difficult global environment. And I think it would be good for us to take that seriously. The second point, which is very important, is, and that's why I referred to mercantilism earlier, that simple approaches of, say, what Trump is doing, high import duties, or what we have been attempting, trade policy and FTAs to get manufacturing going, those kind of policy instruments may not be as effective in the coming days. So the challenge for policymakers is far tougher, and one would need to be very creative. The way to be creative is, since China is the flavor of the times, so I'd refer to Deng Xiaoping, who had two maxims. I don't care about the color of the cat as long as it catches the mice, or I will move across the river feeling my way over the stones that I see. And I would recall a conversation with the World Bank director in Delhi ages ago. He'd just come from China. He's a Korean. So I asked him, what is the difference between China and India? He said, you people are very theoretical, very intelligent, very brilliant, but very theoretical. The Chinese are highly pragmatic. So I'm narrating this anecdote saying that policy has to be pragmatic, and the only thing that should matter is what works. So free trade, protectionism, high import duties, trade policy, all these are good phrases. But in a very specific context, and that is your challenge, is to figure out what will work and deliver results. That's not easy. One point which Rakesh Mohan had made, and he was critical of the PLI, but the success story of Apple has dispelled the myth that we cannot be successful in manufacturing. And to me, all the PLI money that has been given to them is well worth it, because it's told the people of India that we can be as good as manufacturing as anybody else in the world. Because since 2000, I've been reading about that our competitive advantages in services. We have people with minds and they are very strong. We are useless with our hands and we will never succeed in manufacturing. So that Apple has destroyed. Now, going forward, I would come back to the point I made earlier on the real exchange rate. What needs to be understood is that 10% appreciation of the real exchange rate is the equivalent of lowering import duties by 10%. Now, there's a number which I remember correctly, that about 19% was the real exchange rate appreciation according to the RBI in a certain period of time, which effectively meant that a large number of segments, our import duties became negative. So the real exchange rate is critical and I think the most important thing that needs to be addressed. The second, and that is the point I made earlier, I'll repeat it again for Ishtiaq Ahmed's benefit, that we have to look at the cost of doing business or production. That needs a lot of detailed work. It can be state specific, sector specific, but the attempt has to be to address the cost. Going beyond cost is an issue which is not yet on the table in discussion, but it is very important. And that is the issue of bringing domestic value addition center stage, but more than that, domestic value addition by Indian firms center stage. So my exposure to the world of policy and economic policy began around 1991, 92. And Bill Clinton had just become the president of the United States. And he appointed a lady as his chief economic advisor, Laura Tyson. And he appointed her because her book was a bestseller and he picked it up at an airport and read it. And the title of the book was Who's Bashing Whom? Ownership Matters. Now, this was a time when US was being inundated by Japanese cheap imports, and the Japanese were putting up industrial plants in the US. She made a very strong case that you need American firms to remain on top. And US has followed that policy consistently. Now, we, because of the policy paradigm since 91, have believed that we do not quite care whether a firm is Indian or foreign, we favor everybody. So I had a conversation once with two young researchers, not of Indian origin, came from London, who said that we hear that you do not favor domestic firms. Is that correct? And if so, why don't you favor domestic firms? I was in government, so I gave the government line, competition is important. As long as jobs are created, it doesn't matter who does what, and we want FDI, etc., etc. But why domestic firms matter is something which needs a little greater understanding and clarity. And that is that at the end of the day, you can be a middle income country and in a middle income trap, where you create a lot of manufacturing jobs, but the jobs are created by the Apples of the world. Now, the Apples of the world are mobile. So Apple came to India 5 years back, they produced 25% of the iPhones in India. Great success story. But Apple can easily move out. Vietnam is flooded by FDI from China. But if you look at the post-war history, the only countries which have moved beyond the middle income trap and are industrialized countries are ones which have focused on developing domestic firms with domestic control of domestic technology. The Japanese did it, the Koreans did it, the Chinese have done it. And that needs first a commitment to creating national champions, but Indian firms. The second is pushing those firms into mastering cutting edge technology and improving upon it. Both are not yet central to the policy discourse in the country, and I think it's time we made it central. Now, I have not grown up, but last few decades, I've heard time and again, Indian industry is useless, it is not doing this, it is not doing that. They can't face up to competition. Last 8-10 years, they are not investing, they are sitting on cash. They are not investing, they are not doing R&D, this, that, and the other. This, I think, is an intellectually lazy way of looking at things. Because why do firms exist? They exist to make profits. And unless we are able to see why they are not seeing profits and taking the right decisions, we'll have a prescription which will not work. Now look at R&D. Most Indian firms, if a global scale in terms of technology, are irrelevant. So for them to spend their own money to create cutting edge technology is a risk not worth taking. So they'd much rather produce with licensed production or get job work done in China and sell it in India. So unless the state decides to take a deep breath and fund technology development in frontier areas and share it with the Indian private sector, either a few firms or many firms, or make it a public good, we will not achieve the breakthrough in technology. Now, right now, we only fund defense R&D. There is a very strong case of funding R&D for Indian firms. Now, cutting-edge R&D is happening in India. I mean, you meant global design and technology development centers. Indian talent is great. So Indian talent can produce wonderful things, but they need money, and that money can come only from government. That's my submission. The second submission is that we have enormous success of startups, but in the soft areas of apps and things like that. But in the brick and mortar economy where production has to take place, startups do not have the money or access to the money which will make them successful in the market with products. Because venture capital is looking at very short-term returns and very high returns, which will come from aggregators and app developers, but it will not come from a product, because product has a very slow time of development entering the market, and you may enter the market with a first-rate product and fail. I mean, Nano is a first-rate example of a product which gave you excellent patents and excellent car. I have driven in that car, but it failed. So unless we find a system of providing patient capital for startups, for the brick and mortar economy, for physical production, we will not succeed in manufacturing. And that will need some other things. So I will give you one illustration. IIT Mumbai, I had gone there some years back. They have a very good incubation center. But in addition to the incubation center, there is a first-rate professor there with a passion for manufacturing. So he had done this Jugaad 3D printer, I'm talking about 10 years back, and had come up with 5 medical devices which I thought were world champions. I left feeling very sad that I said none of them will succeed in the market because the ecosystem for it is not there. And why is it not there? I mean, what I felt then, I will repeat. First is, how do they produce enough size of production to be able to do sales? I mean, the professor told me they had a friend who was in auto components. As a friend, he produced him those products that I saw. But his friend told me that I lost 1 day's production. So unless government creates production centers where prototypes can be made and can go into the market in small batches to succeed or fail, till then success in the brick and mortar economy would be very difficult. I understand the Japanese did it in the 50s. Many places where you could just go and get things made on job work. But if you go beyond that, then government procurement is an instrument which government has used, has accepted in theory. So if something passes the test, government should be willing to risk to buy it. Now, as of now, thanks to the World Bank and the West, we have been persuaded that nothing should be bought till it has worked successfully for 2 years. Now, by that logic, no Boeing should ever have been sold because it entered the market as a new product. So unless we take the view that a product developed in India by Indian firms with Indian technology would be supported in the market, the government would buy it irrespective of cost and quality till it becomes good. Again, success in manufacturing would be very difficult. And I will use an example which I heard probably in one of your events, and I'll end with that because I think we're into lunchtime. Japan and Brazil started making cars at the same time. Brazil wanted very good cars and they got very good cars. Volkswagen makes very good cars in Brazil and keeps selling good cars. The Japanese said, and the language is politically incorrect, but I'll use it for the dramatic effect, we make shit cars. We will make shit cars, use them till we learn how to make good cars. And the Japanese dominate the global car market. So unless we get this change in mindset and the ambition to catch up, I think we have a huge challenge ahead of us. And there is no way India can be Viksit Bharat in 47. There is no way we can create the jobs we need to create for social stability. There is no way we can get rid of poverty. There is no way we can escape from the freebies which dominate our politics and elections till we succeed in creating jobs, succeed in manufacturing, succeed in becoming an advanced industrial economy. Thank you.
Thank you all speakers. Since we have paucity of time and we have spilled over to the lunchtime, I'll open the session for few questions. With your permission, sir?
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
And I have to apologize for taking more time than I had wanted to take.
Okay. So just few important and very relevant questions can be.
Thank you so much, everyone, for such an insightful, rich discussion. So in both the sessions, we have been talking aloud about comparing India's manufacturing story with that of China's. So my question to Mr. Ajay Shankar ji is that we've seen that China has heavily invested in automation and digital manufacturing. So how can India balance low-cost labor advantages with the need for technological advancement? Thank you.
Can we take one or two more?
Good morning, sir. Good afternoon, sir. So, it is not a question, I just wanted your opinion on one thing. As we were discussing about PLI and MSMEs, as per the stats from 2025 March, out of 764 MSMEs, those have applied for PLI scheme, only 176 have availed the benefits. So there is this gap. Out of so many MSMEs, only 750 MSMEs are applying, and out of those 176 are availing the benefits. So how can we bridge this gap and make it more inclusive for MSMEs?
This is a question to Nagesh and also to Mr. Ajay Shankar. That also, I think Rakesh Mohan raised this issue about the exchange rate, the real effective exchange rate, and said it's a disadvantage for our merchandise trade. How is it that the same exchange rate is not a disadvantage for our services exports? After all, they also have the same exchange rate. So that inconsistency, I'm afraid, I really don't have an answer to. Thank you.
One more? Can we take? Any other? There are a couple of more. Let's take them, and I think we can handle most of them.
So, thank you for the rich discussion. My question is open to all the panelists. All of you have talked about the various interventions that the state has undertaken to enhance the productivity in the manufacturing sector, the PLI scheme, the Gati Shakti, or the rest of the schemes that the panelists have talked about. My question is, how do we arrest the social and environmental cost attached to manufacturing? For instance, in the newer sectors that we're seeing, for instance, the semiconductor industry, the production utilizes ultra pure water, and that is taxing on the existing resources. So please elaborate on that. Thank you.
Very good afternoon to everyone. So,
this is an extremely important session, probably the most important in this conference. And Nagesh has done an excellent job of presenting the problem. I think the slides have really helped the participants. But I would request the panelists and also finally Dr. Ajay Shankar to give a short note of what they have presented, and that should be available, I think, as a matter of record. Otherwise, this will just go in the air. And people that don't have the patience to go to the original recordings and so on. Therefore, it's very important that what has been stated by the panelists and Dr. Mr. Ajay Shankar should be recorded briefly and circulated. Thank you.
We will make a report of this.
So my question is to Emma sir, that you talked about that ease of doing business. We have improved in the rank of it, but why we are so obsessed about improving the rank of ease of doing business? Like if we can't get more FDI even after having improved ease of doing business. So your viewpoint on that?
So maybe last one. Last question.
Thank you so much, all the panelists, for such an enlightening session. It was highlighted by Dr. Rakesh Mohan that the China success story was greatly influenced by the university success also. And universities are credited for enhancing the skills and training the workforce. So how can Indian universities pragmatically contribute to the economic growth and the innovation of India? This is my question. Thank you so much.
So would you like to begin, especially the MSME question and anything else?
Yeah, is it on? Yeah.
It's on.
So now I come to the last question first. Why government is so very obsessed with ease of doing business ranking, and FDI is going not picking up? In fact, both these presumptions are incorrect. First of all, government is not obsessed with the rank, and in fact, the ease of doing business ranking was discontinued in 2020. After that, it's a BRAP, Business Reform Action Plan, which the DPIT undertakes, and there's an extensive survey and primary information is collected. In fact, as I speak, what I have learned from DPIT, they have conducted almost 200,000 surveys, actually getting the ground reality from businesses. So idea is not to improve, just improve the rank. Idea is to bring change on ground. So it's a byproduct that the ranks will also improve. And there is nothing wrong in changing the rank. That's another point I would like to make. So ease of doing a business ranking wherever you are, it is known to the global community, global investor community. They must know where you are ranked. You cannot be doing so many great and good things in your country and you will still want that nobody should know about it. How they will know? So if you top the examination, you want to be at the top rank. So India should aspire to have the top rank, but having said that, what I'm saying that country is not obsessed with the top rank. What we are attempting, country is attempting to bring the changes on ground. In fact, we are also going to, there was a budget announcement to bring investment charter, investment friendliness index in the country. That's the work which has been tasked to NITI Aayog. Incidentally, my vertical is handling that. Here also we have around 96 parameters. Out of them, around 26 of them are primary, where we go to the people and talk to them what they have to say about the business climate of the particular state. Second point you mentioned about that is FDI is going down, isn't going down. FDI is picking up. If you just ignore 21-22 when there was a high around $84 billion, because of certain big deals which had happened, the Geo deal with the major deal which had around $22 billion, FDI has consistently improved. What had happened last year and why the FDI got down, there was a lot of profit booking and there was a lot of exit which happened. So there are two ways of looking at it. One is that we have matured as a market where people can make easy exit, make profit out of their investment. That's one way of looking at it. But the point is that, to that extent, I agree with you, we should be able to attract more and more FDI. So one thing it is around $84 billion, $80 billion. We should be in position to attract more and more FDI. To that extent, I agree with you. And the other question was that about MSMEs. So around 700 MSMEs applied and around 150 of them were selected. See, I told earlier also that this scheme is not designed specifically for MSMEs. And there is the eligibility criteria. So if they are making application, they have to meet the eligibility criteria. And there are very strict parameters with regard to the growth, investment, as well as overall volume of the production. If they don't meet the parameters, they are not eligible for the incentive. So out of 200,000 crores which have been allocated, the utilization has been only in the range of around 25,000 crores. Because though the production is happening, it is not happening at a targeted level. That is how some MSMEs might not have been eligible to get the incentives. It's not that there is any discriminatory treatment towards the MSMEs.
Thank you, sir. There was a specific point raised by Methili to me, why the exchange rate appreciation doesn't affect services exports. The simple answer is that services exports are happening from India because of the huge labor cost arbitrage. And so that is a very big advantage. And labor cost arbitrage in manufacturing is very small, but in services, that is the thing. So even with more appreciation, they will continue to happen. There will be a 1 to 10 type of arbitrage. So that's very simple. Well, the other thing I wanted to say, respond to Rakesh Mohan, my very old and very dear friend. We always disagree on certain things. Partly our chairman responded. His view is that liberalization is always good and we will become more efficient economy. You see, the trade theory that we have read, all of us, which leads to this conclusion, has a very strong assumption that perfect competition and full employment. If that assumption is not met, then this liberalization helping you doesn't work. And that my point of showing in the first instance that how 70% of global capacity is in one country. So you have a dominant player in the world which is subsidizing its producers by 5% of GDP. Then you open up to them, then they will flood your market. So whatever little manufacturing we have, out. Forget about all manufacturing. So liberalization works when you are equal players, not when one is a sumo wrestler, other is a pygmy, you bring them together, the result. So, this is something Rakesh Mohan and I have been debating forever, and I don't think we will convince we will convince each other. But he's a very sharp mind, very good mind, and he made a lot of other very good points. But on this, and I agree that for making efficient competitive manufacturing sector, we need to allow our producers to have access to the cheapest raw materials. But the point is that if Apple is able to make competitively phones in India by all imported inputs, he himself gave the example that the value addition was only for 5% or 6% or 10%. So rest is coming from outside. So if they can do this, so what is the problem? So the imports of raw materials and intermediates should be without any duties, but final products, if we open it up to a highly subsidized economy like China, we can as well forget about our manufacturing. So I'll stop here. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Probably I take one. Yeah, probably I just take the one on the social and environmental cost of manufacturing because this is quite an important issue. It's true. The manufacturing sector has been accounting globally for around 30% of the global emissions. But what the data of the last 10 years are starting showing is that what we call a positive decoupling. The more the manufacturing sector grow now, it's disconnected with the CO2 emission intensities of the companies, which means that the more the technologies, the more the industries are starting to deploy in their manufacturing sites clean technologies for creating, for solving the problems, the less will be the impact. There is still a lot to be done, but I think it's the more the cost of the technology will going down with solar or other clean technology, the more we'll see that the manufacturing can be sustainable, so that at least the environmental cost can be offset in quite a short time. Thank you.
I would add to what he has said. Europe has come up with this CBAM mechanism, So you pay a higher import duty if the embedded carbon in the product is higher. Now, I believe that we should welcome this in India and use this as a lever to take the full benefit of a late mover's advantage. So we can, with good industrial policy and financial support from government, support the creation of new production facilities which have the lowest embedded carbon in the world. And there is a real phenomenon of the late mover's advantage. I mean, most Indians know this, they haven't known anything else. They're seeing the internet on this, nothing else. So we can become an advanced industrial economy which is green. And it's an opportunity for us. And if you just take a simple comparison, I have a 10 million ton capacity of steel in China, and I want to produce green steel, that capacity has to be closed. So there's a cost of closure plus building new. We have only the cost of building new. So green manufacturing is a potential for us moving into higher league of industrialization. And green manufacturing and net zero is essential for the survival of India and the world. So that's a more stronger answer to your question. On China, I'll make just one point. The Chinese have been simple-minded in their determination to become a great industrial power. Theirs has been a war economy. So government, business, academia, civil society, elite, all work at one purpose, which is to succeed globally. And I believe we can do the same. And it is a mistake to say that democracy is a handicap. Because till 91, we had a messy democracy, we still did very well. So it's a question of coming to the national consensus that we have to succeed in manufacturing globally, no matter what it costs. And I had referred to in my earlier opening comment that there is a political economy contradiction between present consumption, freebies or welfare, and tightening of the belt and succeeding in creating jobs and becoming prosperous. And I think the political economy balance has to necessarily shift in favor of creating jobs and succeeding in manufacturing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all the speakers, for their insightful comments and very, insightful and discussion. I would, as a token of thankfulness on behalf of ISID, I would call upon my colleague, Dr. Isha Chawla, to present mementos to the speakers, please.